Next on Broadway Profiles, the Broadway Advocacy Coalition. We'll talk to one of the founders of the BAC, Britton Smith, about holding the theater community to a higher standard. Plus, Hairspray on tour, we're chatting with the show's amazing lead, RuPaul's Drag Race star, Nina West. And Broadway's about to go ham again. We talked to the choreographer of one of Broadway's biggest shows, the hip-hop breakout hit, Hamilton. I'm Tamsen Fadal, and this is Broadway Profiles, presented by Broadway.com. And thank you so much for being here. I'm Tamsen Fadal. It's almost here, the return of Broadway. The first Broadway musicals return in less than a week. September 2nd's the day. That's when Hadestown and Waitress are back on the Great Bright Way. Rehearsals are now underway for Broadway's return. This is a look behind the scenes at The Lion King, the emotional first day back in the rehearsal room. A really moving first sing-through of the song's iconic opening number, The Circle of Life. The Lion King and 3 more of Broadway's best shows resume performances September 14th. There are even more signs of life on Broadway, like this. The box office just reopened for the musical Six. On September 17th, the original cast will step back into their roles as the 6 wives of Henry VIII. Six was in previews when the pandemic shut down Broadway in March 2020. Broadway's Tony Award-winning musical Hairspray is back and hitting the road. Paul Wontorek caught up with the star of the show, Andrew Levitt. Take it away, Paul.
Hairspray's Edna Turnblad is timeless to theater fans. You may know Andrew as RuPaul's Drag Race favorite, Nina West. I met up with Andrew as Nina at New York City's Time Hotel. Located in the heart of the theater district, just steps away from Times Square, its lush penthouse also provided the perfect backdrop to capture the talent's very first transformation into Edna Turnblad. Take a look. This is very exciting.
Yeah.
There was a national tour of Hairspray. Andrew, you created Nina West.
Yeah.
And became famous.
Yeah, it's this really crazy story and this really remarkable journey that I've kind of been on.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up loving musical theater. My grandma took me to my very first Broadway show. I had this lifelong love of live theater.
Yeah.
And I went to college for theater, and my goal was to move to New York, and I graduated in 2001, and do the math, and 9/11 happened, and I stayed home. And so I kind of created Nina in that interim period of 20 years. And since then, I've come to New York as often as I can to see shows, to be inspired, to allow that to kind of inform my creative work, and Drag Race happened, and here I am.
And Edna Turnblad, very different from Nina West.
Oh, 100, yeah, I'm not a mom. She's a character who has her own story, her own transformation, her own journey throughout the musical.
Yeah.
And I live in a world of confidence. I really love myself. I love what I do. I love the ability to stand on stage and entertain people. You know, my confidence is kind of in that, is rooted in that. And Edna, you know, we see Edna at the beginning of the show really just not in love with herself and not in love with her body, and you know, and not really loving where she's at in life. And it's great to watch this journey and this transition. What's so cool about this show, and what's remarkable about the power of the art form of drag, is that we get to see a transformation. Drag reveals who you are. RuPaul always says that, and I really do agree with that. Drag reveals the person. It doesn't conceal, it doesn't hide you. And so we get to see Edna kind of being in this very simple state in the beginning, but by the end of the show, we get to see her revealed into this gorgeous butterfly, right? And it kind of like, when we see her coming out of the can of Hairspray, it's almost like coming out of a cocoon, or more of themselves even.
Drag really has its roots in theater. I mean, if you think about theater
oh
and
my
drag,
God.
Shakespeare,
really, I mean, come on.
I mean, do you consider, like, Andrew creating Nina West, is this like a character in the same sense of how you would create a theatrical
100%.
Yeah.
When I first started drag, I was so intimidated by the art form. Not only because, but primarily I started at a time when there wasn't Drag Race, and there weren't YouTube tutorials, and it was queens in bars and nightclubs, and feeling that kind of judgment from gay men specifically, like, oh, you're a queen, oh, you're a drag queen. And then, when you have a show that like Drag Race come along and really infiltrate people's homes and talk about the beauty of this community and share and celebrate this art form, it does take it to a different level. And I think when I first started drag, I was so ashamed, and so I felt like I was just shamed by it, and I was ashamed to do it. And as I've grown, now having done drag for almost 22 years, I have really embraced this crazy, incredible, beautiful art form that does allow me to celebrate and accentuate my body, celebrate my personality quirks. Theater taught me that. So when I was in school for theater, I learned all these incredible skills. How to memorize a script, how to tell a story. And then someone came up to me when I first started drag, like, relax, calm down, approach this like you approach theater. And I was like, oh. So then I took Nina, and the first few songs or performances or live performances I was doing, I was like, let me write a character study, let me write intention, and it could be a 3.5-minute song. I was like, okay, what do I mean? And I was that bookish, nerdy kid trying to just prove to myself that I had to find some validity or worth. But I still, to this day, think that theater and drag are so closely related. They're the same thing.
Yeah.
And we're providing escapism, we're providing hope, we're providing energy, we're providing commentary, social commentary, and that's any good theater piece.
There are a lot of Drag Race fans. I love the idea that you'll be bringing a lot of them into the theater.
I do think that the show does, much like the show Drag Race does. Drag Race does introduce young people and their families to the art of drag.
Yeah.
I think this show will introduce young people to the art of theater.
I love how emotional you're getting talking about it, because there's something about theater that people have this connection. It's sort of...
I recognized early on where my people were. I recognized I could see them. So that's where I saw people in the theater, and I saw people in the arts, and I was like, I have to go. I knew I was a creative soul. I knew I was driven in that world, but I was reinforced by knowing that people like me were in those spaces, and that was a safe space for me. And so I think it was like almost like an allowance, and okay, and you should, yes. And so when you see a show like Hairspray, and it is so queer. This is a very profoundly queer show. Being a part of this, knowing, that's why, I'm getting choked up because I know what this is. And I know what this did for me when I was 20. I know what it's doing to me when I'm 42. I can't imagine what it's gonna do for somebody who's young and closeted and sees someone like me or Billy Porter, or it doesn't matter who it is that's queer and out and doing the work, but that representation does matter, because it allows people to see themselves and allows them to say, I matter. I have a space, that's a space I can go to. That's a space I can fill. That's something I can be a part of. Yeah, it makes me emotional.
All right, let's go ahead and talk Tonys, because September 26th, the Tony Awards will honor the 2019-2020 season and the return of live theater. Plus, that night, the American Theater Wing will honor an organization that forced Broadway to take a long, hard look in the mirror. Here's Broadway.com correspondent Charlie Cooper.
Founded in 2016 by several Black members of the Broadway community, the Broadway Advocacy Coalition unites artists, legal experts, and community advocates for lasting impact. I sat down with one of the founders, Britton Smith, at the Renaissance Hotel in New York City to talk more about BAC's Special Tony Award and so much more. So, of course, right now, everybody is talking about equality, equity, inclusion. How do you guys ensure that those things are more than just buzzwords, but instead actions on the ground?
I think everybody has their own idea of what equity and inclusion is, and I think BAC defines true equity, true inclusion of allowing everybody to feel like they can bring their full selves to work, right? There's a way I was told to exist in an airport, there's a way I was told to exist in schools, there was a way I was told to exist even in rehearsal rooms, even trained in the industry. This is how you behave in a rehearsal room. And some of those trainings have taken away my inherent Blackness and my inherent way of being in my own culture to fit in the culture that I want to be in and thrive in. So equity and inclusion really starts with everybody being able to show up as your full self and then being treated uniquely as your full self, not as, it's so great to have this person of color on the team. It's like, no. why is it important, and asking people those hard questions so that they can really honor that person's fullness, you know.
So as Broadway returns, can you kind of talk about what are some things you hope just the industry in general does differently?
There's a lot of change that needs to happen, but the first day of rehearsal is such a precious, pivotal moment when everybody comes back to work. We believe that transparency needs to happen, a full welcome of, yo, we just went through a pandemic. Some of y'all lost things, some of you gained things. The world has evolved. Let's talk about, let's make space for what that evolution is gonna look like.
Yeah, have you guys started training or anything like that? And if so, what's that looked like?
Yeah, one of our trainings is this first day rehearsal workshop. We call it REP, Reimagining Equitable Productions. And it looks like, you know, welcoming everybody in, having them all name what type of ways are they used to showing up to rehearsal. We love to name in all of our work, what are you used to and what do you want? And then we as BAC like to navigate and facilitate a process of how do we get to point world we want to live in, and how do we involve everybody who has to be a part of that world in the creation of that. So how do we create a space where they can all name their values of how they want to work together, and then how do you link on top of that accountability to, okay, this is how we want to work together. Now, how are we gonna ensure that when we fall out of that, we know how to get back into that?
So you guys won a special Tony. Congrats.
We did.
How exciting. What did that moment mean for you? Could you believe it?
You know, we're a young organization, and a special Tony goes to like James Earl Jones, you know, at the end of his like legacy career. So it's a shock, and it also makes us feel very seen by the industry. I feel like the industry is saying to us, we see you, we need you, let's begin a real process working together.
Maybe Broadway's biggest night in the foreseeable future is September 14th. 4 of Broadway's favorite musicals come back on that same night: Chicago, The Lion King, Wicked, and of course Hamilton. So many of us have had our minds blown by the musical on Disney Plus during the pandemic. But there's nothing like seeing it live. We caught up with the show's choreographer, Andy Blankenbuehler, in this edition of Building Broadway.
The first step for me when I started working on Hamilton was I actually had to learn the piece, because there was so much music and so many story points that I wanted to sort of identify the really high points and the points of transition, and differentiate one battle from the next and one plot point from the next. Early in our process, I remember sitting with David Corrins and with Tommy, and we saw, you know, we would see readings of the show, and the readings were so powerful. So in many ways, I saw the readings and wondered if I needed to choreograph it. Like, was it better just sitting on a chair and saying the words? And what we would always say to each other is, stay out of the way of the lyric. Like, we need to stay out of the way of the words. Like, you can't be jumping around and dancing around, or people won't follow what's being said. So I always see choreography, but especially with Hamilton, as sort of an impressionistic painting, where the surround of bodies has to inform what you're supposed to be looking at. Like in Impressionism, you look at one thing in focus, and everything around it points to it. And that's what we do with our lyric. Because the show is about true and deep, deep emotion, the movement is often very strong and very wide and very low to the floor. And dancing with that intensity isn't very easy to sustain for almost 3 hours a night. So when I finally start choreographing, what I do is I use my computer, I push the camera on, I just record everything I do in the studio. Here's a perfect example of just improvising. This is what would become Just Like My Country, I'm Young, Scrappy, and Hungry. You see, the steps aren't anything except for the pop, the timing of it. Just like my country, I'm young, scrappy, and hungry. The chin felt right, the pop felt right. This was probably the biggest night in Hamilton, which was a day that Lynn wrote a new bridge for Rumor It Happens, and I could not choreograph the number, and I pulled an all-nighter, and it was in this all-nighter that I kind of cracked the step. Skin in the game is what we call the section. And as soon as I figured out that one section, the number just spilled out, and I just stayed up all night. So that's what this library is about. And again, what I'll do then is I'll take the clips of myself, the improvs of myself, then we'll meet with dancers, and with dancers, like, that was the first improv step. Now I'm with 3 dancers in the room, and that's the beginning of Just Like My Country, and we find the steps together. And oftentimes, it's actually a pantomime before it's a dance step. So I'll bring it to the dancers saying, this isn't the step, but the step feels like this. And those dancers often have so much better style than I have that they immediately make it look so much more heightened than I can make it. So that's sort of the ins and outs of it. And I like to go into rehearsal with the sequences like 60 to 70% finished. The show is about learning what's most important in life to you and fighting for it with everything you have. And if your heart is true about it, then you're going to be on the right path.
There is still a whole lot more to talk about on this edition of Broadway Profiles. An icon comes back. It's the triumphant return of one of the all-time great Broadway restaurants, Joe Allen. We'll be right back. Broadway lost an icon a few months back. Legendary Theater District restaurateur Joe Allen passed away in February. But his iconic namesake is poised to return to Restaurant Row this month with a safe new redesign, courtesy of Tony Award winner David Rockwell. We got a look inside.
Joe Allen's is one of those legendary restaurants, and it's legendary for a reason, and that is, Broadway is such a mythic part of New York. People come to New York to see a Broadway show, and they look for the center of Broadway life, and for many of the performers and many of the designers, the community of people who make theaters, Joe Allen has been like our Cheers. The collection of posters on the wall of Joe Allen's are all legendary Broadway flops that came and went in one day. So if you didn't go to the previews, it lives in legend, and it lives on the wall in Joe Allen. When we spoke to Joe Allen's and they said after 7 months they were going to reopen, we had started to think about what would be the guidelines that we could use to help restaurants open up indoors. We filled the restaurant with these screen walls and invited 2 friends of ours, Linda Cho, a Tony Award-winning costume designer, and Ruben Toledo. So we invited them to customize these screens. They're 5 feet tall, so they deal with horizontal movement from table to table, but they also create a little bit of coziness. And then had a number of other things that were important. These HEPA filters that you see on the ground that circulate the air, increase the fresh air capacity of the air conditioning system, and also opened up outdoor dining. So much of what we remember about our experiences in the city is defined by where we had dinner, where we met with friends. I think those are critical to what makes New York so amazing.
Still ahead, The Green Machine, Wicked, comes back to Broadway this month. We're going to talk to one of the awesome members of the ensemble about why he's just gotta dance. We can't wait for the return of Wicked. September 14th is the date, a huge night for Broadway. And that's why we talked to one of the awesome members of the ensemble, Josh Daniel Green, about why he's just gotta dance.
Hi, I'm Josh Daniel Green. I'm from Lakeville, Minnesota, small town outside of Minneapolis. I grew up dancing there at a dance competition studio. It's the classic story. I followed my sister to dance class. I thought that looked really fun, and I should definitely try that, as boys do, and I loved it. I took my first dance class at 5 years old. It was a ballet and tap class. I believe the tap song for the recital was Rhinestone Cowboy. It's like a little cowboy vest, and there was a little cactus on stage. I was obsessed with the cactus that was on stage as well, and tried to dance near it. I kind of took a winding path to musical theater from growing up. I was always super inspired by the older dancers in our studio that were training so hard, and they were off to professional things, and I started to see that it was a possibility to make it a career, make it my life, that it wasn't just something I did for fun. I had a really fulfilling dance company career. We were making a lot of pieces, we were touring the United States and Europe, and I really felt fulfilled by all of that. But at the same time, I was also wanting to experience something with the storytelling aspect of dance, that dance can be a part of something larger than just abstract dance for dance sake. I think my first fall in love moment with musical theater was seeing 42nd Street at Chanhassen Dinner Theaters. I listened to it all the time and sing along with it, and just kind of live your dreams in your head about doing something like that on stage one day. It's incredibly fulfilling to think that I started as a kid in a dance class in a strip mall, and to be dancing on Broadway. I'm doing this right now. I am dancing on Broadway. I am making a living doing what I love, and I get to share that with other people, and it's an incredibly full circle moment.
And that's going to do it for us. Until next time, I'm Tamsen Fadal, and this is Broadway Profiles.